In this video, we're going to make a biscuit cutter out of a solid piece of American Black Walnut. It's so good to see you. I'm glad you're here with me today. In this video, I'm going to share with you an item that I regularly make and sell at farmers markets. And it's a cool little old-fashioned looking biscuit cutter that's used for cutting out round biscuits in the kitchen while you're baking. So it makes a really great gift for bakers, and it's also good for someone that really likes biscuits and gravy. So I hope this project is something that you can go out and make and learn some skills and share them with others. I'm Jason Geiser, and this is Geiserwoodturner. Let's make a solid wood biscuit cutter. We're going to go ahead and mark the centers on this blank and get it ready to put into a chuck. So I'm going to mark all four sides, and then I'm just going to make a little mark in the center. We'll do that on both sides, and then I'll put it between centers and bring up the tailstock. And it's always a good idea to spin and make sure everything clears, and then turn the lathe on, gradually bring the speed up. Then I'm going to use my spindle roughing gouge and just gradually take some material away until we get that round. It's always nice to stop and check and see if you're round. And we're not quite there yet, so we'll keep going a little bit more. And there, that feels pretty good. So now what we need to do is put a tenon on the end of this piece of walnut. I'm going to use a skew chisel and a peeling cut here. And we'll just peel away the material until we go down to about where I think it's going to be. And then I've got a set of calipers that I'll check with and make sure that my tenon here is about the right size, and I need a little bit more off. The next thing I'll need to do is to make this tenon into a dovetail so it'll fit the dovetail on my chuck and it'll be nice and tight. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that with the skew chisel. You can use a scraper or any tool that you want that will set the angle to about what your dovetail jaws on your chuck will be. So we'll go ahead and take that out between centers, and we'll put the chuck on the lathe. One thing I like to do when I put a chuck on is I'll spin it all the way on, and then just about when the shoulders are about to touch, I'll give it a nice tight snap, and what that does is it stops it from moving later on. And we'll go ahead and tighten up our piece of wood into the chuck jaws. And whenever you mount a piece of wood, it's never completely true. For some reason there's little minor imperfections that cause it to be out of round again. So one thing that I like to do is just true everything up with the spindle roughing gouge one more time. And that way it's true to the way that it's mounted right now. So at this point, with that surface trued up, we need to work on the end grain and true that up and make it 90 degrees to the other surface. So I'm going to try a shoulder cut here, and I want to point the bevel in the direction I want to go and just strongly bring it in and take ever so slightly a small amount, less than a 1/16th, and get that started, and then I can rest the bevel and bring it down a little farther. And we'll make two really slight cuts just to clean that up. And the reason I do this cut is because it doesn't tear the end grain, and so I have a nice surface. And I don't need to go all the way down with this, just to where my biscuit cutter edge will be. Alright, so now we need to remove some material from the center of this and hollow it out. Now you can do this a number of different ways. At first I'm trying out a 2 1/8 Forstner bit. That's the biggest Forstner bit that I own, and looking at it, it's just not quite big enough for what I want. Really, I want a wall thickness from the outside to the inside at about 1/4 inch to 5/16 so that I can taper it down on the outside and make a fine point to cut the biscuit with. So I'm just going to draw a line here on where I want it to go, and then we're going to remove this material with some good old-fashioned end grain hollowing with a spindle gouge. So I'll just move my tool rest down a little bit, get everything adjusted so that I'm on center with my 3/8 spindle gouge. Then we'll turn the lathe on, and then we'll just start to hollow from the center and work our way out. And so I'll just take a little bit at a time and work my way towards that outside. I'll take a few passes in the center, then I'll come out and bring it to almost to where I hit my line. I usually like to leave myself with a little playroom that I can clean up later. So we'll just keep making a few passes until we bring this deeper and deeper. And really it doesn't take a long time, and it's actually kind of fun to me. Just pass after pass and we'll get there. And because I like my biscuits kind of thick, we'll go ahead and keep hollowing, and I like to hollow it down to where it's about 1.25 inches deep at the wall, and then I dome it a little bit in the center to make it just look good, and so it looks like we need to go another maybe 1/4 inch, so I'll hollow down a little ways, and then I'll start cleaning the rest of it up with scrapers. So I'll go ahead and stop the lathe at this point, kind of clear out the shavings and junk that's in there, and then I'm going to use my depth gauge to go in and just check how far in I am, and it looks like I'm in far enough, and that's where I want to be. So now I'm going to take my box scraper, and it's a scraper that I ground myself that's kind of loosely based on Jimmy Clue's design, and it's one that I can plunge down the side and take a little bit at a time. And then when I get all the way down to the bottom, there's not a lot of surface area to catch and cause a lot of vibrations or anything like that. So I can go almost all the way down to the bottom, and then when it touches, I'm fine. So I'll just kind of bring this out little by little and just plunge down a little bit until I get all the way out to that line that I drew on the outside. And then we'll just make a straight wall all the way down to the bottom. And then I can kind of tilt the tool and take away little bits of material to kind of blend in that edge and the dome that I have on the top right there. Alright, that looks and feels pretty good. I use my fingers a lot because they don't lie to me. They tell me things my eyes can't anymore. So then we'll go in and just kind of clean up this dome with a round scraper. And then, probably not so critical on walnut, but I like to tip it up on its edge a little bit and do a shear scrape across the bottom. And really what that does is helps prevent tear out, and you can make some really light, fine cuts across there. But walnut doesn't tear too easily, so it should be alright. As long as your tools are nice and sharp. So alright, that's done, and we can go ahead and sand. And I won't take you through the whole process, but I sand 120, 180, and then 240 on this. I guess the next thing that I need to do is create some holes in the top of our biscuit cutter, and what those do is they make it so that the biscuit doesn't get suctioned up in there and make it hard to get it out. So you could always just shake it and get it out as long as you have some holes to relieve the pressure. So I'm just going to make a mark of the depth here, and we'll go ahead and bring that around. And now I need to know kind of what my wall thickness will be here, so I'm going to give it another 1/4 inch or so, and then that gives me an idea of how deep I need to go with my drill bit, because if I do it now I can cut away the excess material, but I don't want to go all the way up into the handle that I'm going to make. So if I bring the drill bit up and set the depth just past that line, then I'll be cutting into material that I'm going to turn away later anyways. So I'll take a piece of blue tape and just kind of mark the depth on the drill bit. Then I'll know where to stop at. So I'll go ahead and drill that hole, get it up close to the inner wall, and then just go ahead and drill until I get to the tape, bring that back out, and then I can do the other side. Now once the holes are drilled, I can start to actually shape the biscuit cutter on the outside. So what I want to do is start down here on the end, and I want to bring this down to a point, and this will actually form the cutting edge of the biscuit cutter. So I'll just take it down little by little, and I'll try and get a nice straight cut from that first line all the way out to the edge using my 3/8 spindle gouge. And it seems like my cut's just a little bit rough here, like it's not cutting through very well. So as I get down closer, I'm going to switch to a bigger gouge. So I'm going to switch to my 1/2 inch spindle gouge, and what that does, sometimes it just smooths out and gives you a smoother surface as you go. You can also use your spindle roughing gouge for this part. If you're skilled enough with a skew chisel works great. You just don't want to go too far. You want to leave maybe a 1/16 or a little less on that cutting edge. You don't want to completely bring it down to a point though. You can get it down pretty fine with sandpaper when you're all done. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to switch back to my 3/8 spindle gouge, and we're just going to kind of define this line right here, just kind of round down into it so that I know where the top of this will be. And we'll just kind of bring out the shape, then remove material on the other side, and just work our way down into this cove that we're going to create here. So that's looking pretty good, and I like the thickness that I'm feeling inside. So we'll go ahead and continue here, just smooth everything out, and I want to work my way down till I run into those holes that I drilled in the bottom. So I'll just take away material a little at a time. You can see in wood turning it's just kind of one pass at a time. You just take a little bit, take a little bit more, take a little bit more until you get down to the shape that you like. If you try and do too much at once, that's usually when disaster happens. So take your time and have fun with it. Okay, now it's probably a good idea to stop here, and we just kind of want to see where everything's at and how everything's looking. So I've gone through and hit those holes, but they're not quite all the way through yet, and I can tell it's pretty thick right there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on, and we're going to remove some more material there. So the important thing is here is to keep that bevel on the piece of wood, and as I rotate it around, keep that bevel on there, and just pick up this cut and take one little slice at a time. And that should be enough to get through those holes. And so we'll just kind of bring that cove a little bit deeper, and then we'll keep going a little bit deeper with each pass. And you'll notice that as I'm cutting a lot more from the top and then down to the center, and then from the top and then down to the center. And I'm doing that on purpose because you always want to be going downhill. So that way you're not cutting against the grain, you're always cutting with the grain as you go down. And that's important because when you're cutting against the grain, it likes to grab and take off chunks, and it's never a good idea. So now what I'm doing is I'm just removing some material from this handle. It's a little bit too thick up top. I want it to be thinner than the bottom of the biscuit cutter. Make it a little bit more comfortable to hold. So I'll just remove some material and then just kind of generally round over both sides. And you can see the shapes beginning to come out here. And we'll just kind of generally remove some more material to get it out of the way so that I can concentrate on the shape that I want to make. At this point I'm going to have to bring out my narrow parting tool because I really can't reach in there all the way with my spindle gouge. So I'll just kind of remove some material behind and then keep working my way towards the handle. And then I'll just remove a little bit more material here. And we'll see if that's enough room. I can just take a little bit more with the spindle gouge before I have to flip it around and do that. So I can come down, and I'm very careful not to hit that wing as I come around on that waste material on the left side. And I'll go about as far as I can and without touching, and then I'll stop. and then I can do all the rest with the parting tool, or I can reverse it on the lathe and turn it around, and we can clean up all the rest after that. So before I go too much farther, I want to go ahead and sand this, and I'll do the same process that I did before. I'll start with a 120, go to a 180, and then go to a 240. I took a look at the holes that I cut through, and there's some frayed out material there. And I learned a trick that can help with that. If you take that drill bit that you used and run it back into the hole, being careful not to touch the handle, and just kind of wiggle it around a little bit, it cuts away all that fray and cleans that up nice for you. Now that it's sanded, I can remove some more material because it won't vibrate as much. And we'll go ahead and get out that narrow parting tool and work it down to where I'm close to a 1/4 inch. I don't want to part it all the way off, and the reason for that is it likes to go flying off there and damage the piece that I'm working on. So I'll get this Japanese pull saw out, and I'll pull back a couple of times, and then I'll realize that I'm not left-handed. So I'll do a couple of swipes right-handed, and it comes right off of there. Now this biscuit cutter is just a little bit smaller than the ones that I normally make. Normally I try and get them to cut about a 3-inch biscuit. And since we started out with about a 3-inch round blank when we started, this one's about 2.5 inches. So I put on a different chuck just so that I could slide it over the jaws. And then you want to just kind of ever so slightly tighten it. If you tighten it too much, it's definitely going to crack this. So be very careful if you do it this way. You can also use a jam chuck to hold it or something like that. And if you're nervous about that, you can also just sand the top. So with that mounted in there, I'm going to make all my cuts towards the headstock. And what that's going to do is make it so that I can't put too much pressure on this, sideways pressure that will want to pull it out of those jaws. So I'll kind of nibble my way down in the center and then go to the outside and start just removing that little piece of material a little at a time and work my way towards the center. Now when I get done with that, I can always choose to do something similar to that shoulder cut that I made before, where I will tip the gouge sideways and then make that cut where I'm slicing towards the center. And it does put a little bit of sideways pressure on it, but if you're taking very, very small amounts, it's not too much, and it will do the job for you and get rid of any tear out or anything like that that you'll have in the end grain of this. So I'll go ahead and do that. Now I have it kind of flattened out here, and there's a little bit of a lump in the middle, but I want to get it nice and perfectly flat here, because what I like to do is I have a brand that has my initials on it, and it's a kind of a way I can sign my work, and I'll brand the top of it here, but it needs to be pretty flat. And you can choose to do this rounded or however you want to do it, just to get the look that you want. This is just the way that I do it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and sand that exactly the way I did on the rest of the project to make it blend in and look just like the rest of it. And then I'll get out a propane torch, and you can see I've got my brand that I made. It's a little logo with my initials on it. I'll go ahead and heat up the brass end and get that ready to rest on the piece of wood, and I plunge it in and let it sink in a little bit, and I've got that nice and branded. And then I can take some sandpaper and just kind of clean up all that extra burn marks that I left on there, and then it'll be good to go. We can take it off of there and oil it. Alright, well this is the point at which you can put any food safe finish that you want onto this item. I like to use walnut oil, and there's a couple different reasons for that. I like walnut oil because it dries on the surface, and because it's a polymerizing oil, and it helps protect it and keep it looking good for a long time, and it's something you can always reapply. And I can always put this immediately into use, or what I like to do a lot of times is just let it dry for a few days or weeks and then buff some wax onto it to make it real nice and shiny and feel nice. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a really good day and enjoy your wood turning. We'll see you soon.